You are wielding a loaded weapon every single time you open your mouth, and yet you pull the trigger blindly, recklessly, in crowded rooms full of witnesses who will never warn you of the damage being done. You joke about being broke at the dinner table. You complain about being exhausted in the break room. You casually declare with a laugh and a shrug that your life is a complete disaster, and everyone nods and everyone laughs, and the moment passes. But something in the architecture of reality does not laugh. Something ancient, precise, and utterly without mercy is listening, recording, and executing. Florence Scovel Shinn, one of the most penetrating metaphysical minds of the 20th century, issued a warning that the modern world has largely ignored at catastrophic cost. Your word is not a mere description of reality. It is a spoken verdict. The universal subconscious mind operates as a courtroom of supreme and final jurisdiction, and you, whether you know it or not, whether you consent or not, are seated at the bench as its supreme judge. Every word you utter is transcribed into the cosmic record as a legally binding decree. The universe does not understand sarcasm. It does not process irony. It does not take jokes. When you say, "I am dying of fatigue," the gavel comes down with the full force of law, and the biological intelligence of your own body begins organizing itself to comply with the sentence you have just handed down. You are not venting. You are not expressing yourself. You are sentencing yourself with devastating precision to the exact life you are complaining about. Consider for a moment the particular cruelty of this situation, because it is not random misfortune that has brought chaos into your life. The pain most people carry is not the pain of bad luck descending from some indifferent sky. It is the pain of self-sabotage, the bewildering, maddening experience of wondering why catastrophe keeps finding you, why debt keeps returning, why relationships keep collapsing, why the door to abundance seems permanently locked from the outside. You search for external causes. You blame the economy, the timing, the people around you. But Shinn points the lens inward, and what it reveals is almost unbearable in its simplicity. You have been calling these things to you by name. Every morning, every conversation, every throwaway comment has been a summons. You are the one ringing the bell, and then standing in horror when what you rang for actually arrives at your door. This is not a metaphor designed to comfort you. This is the operation of a law as mechanical and indifferent as gravity. Think of it this way, because the image must be precise. You are standing inside your own house holding a lit match, systematically setting each room ablaze, and then stepping outside to complain loudly about the heat. The house is your life. The match is your mouth. And the neighbors, the world, your colleagues, your circumstances, they are not the arsonists. You are. Florence Scovel Shinn did not teach this to shame you. She taught it because embedded within this terrifying diagnosis is the most liberating promise ever offered to a human being. If your words built the prison, then your words hold the key. The same mechanism that issued the sentence of poverty can issue the pardon. The same instrument that decreed sickness can decree radiant health. The same voice that called failure into the room can command it to leave and never return. The law does not play favorites. It does not reward the spiritually advanced and punish the beginner. It executes every decree with identical, mathematical precision, which means the moment you change the verdict, the physical reality of your life is legally obligated to begin reorganizing itself around the new command. This is the promise at the center of this teaching, and it must be stated with the full weight it deserves. Shinn promised, not suggested, not hoped, but promised, that if you learn to treat your vocabulary as what it truly is, an invisible weapon of supreme creative power, and if you develop the discipline to tame your tongue with the same rigor a master swordsman develops in handling a blade, you can literally speak a new empire into existence, not through wishful thinking, not through the passive repetition of pleasant-sounding phrases, but through the conscious, deliberate issuance of commands that carry the authority of a judge who understands the full weight of the law. Change the verdict and the physical world, your bank account, your health, your relationships, the very circumstances that surround you, must execute the new sentence. It has no choice. It is bound by law. What you are about to receive in this video is not inspiration. It is not encouragement. It is a protocol, a precise, structured, and executable set of instructions that Shinn herself derived from decades of working with real men and women who transformed real, documented, desperate circumstances through the disciplined application of the spoken word. We will call this the vocal discipline protocol, and when you understand it fully and apply it with the seriousness it demands, you will understand that you are not learning a spiritual practice. You are learning to issue commands that the fabric of reality is structurally compelled to obey. This is the difference between someone who prays and hopes and someone who decrees and expects. We are training you to be the latter, the judge who speaks from the bench with full authority, knowing that the order will be carried out. Before we proceed, this channel requires a commitment from you, because what follows is not casual content to be consumed and forgotten. If you are prepared to take your seat on the bench, to accept the full weight of your power as the issuing authority of your own life, then type the words, "My word is law," in the comments below. This is not a ritual for its own sake. It is your first conscious decree. Perhaps the first time in your life you have said those words and meant them with full understanding of what they legally and cosmically imply. Write them, mean them, and understand that the courtroom of the universe just recorded your declaration. There is something else you must know before we go further, something I'm going to address in detail in part 4 of this video, because it is the most insidious form of verbal self-destruction that exists, and it is happening in virtually every social circle on Earth, every single day, disguised as humor and human connection. It is what Shinn identified as the idle jest, the casual, sarcastic, self-deprecating joke you make at your own expense to get a laugh from the people around you. It is the quickest, most socially acceptable, and most devastatingly effective way to curse your own bank account, sabotage your own health, and seal your own fate while everyone in the room is laughing. I will expose this verbal poison fully and without mercy in part 4. Do not skip it. What you learn there may be the single most practically impactful piece of information in this entire video. To understand the law of the wand, the foundational principle upon which Florence Scovel Shinn constructed her entire metaphysical system, you must first strip away every casual diminutive association you have with the word wand and replace it with something far more precise and consequential. In the mythological traditions that predate modern civilization, the wand was not a theatrical prop or a child's toy. It was the symbol of supreme executive authority, the physical extension of a being whose will had been so thoroughly aligned with universal law that their spoken command carried the force of cosmic decree. When the ancient priests, kings, and initiates raised the wand and spoke, it was understood, not symbolically, but literally, that they were not requesting an outcome. They were issuing one. Shinn reached back into this ancient understanding and translated it into a precise, modern, and actionable law. Your word is your wand. And she did not mean this poetically. What she meant, expressed in the language of the science of mind, is that the spoken word is a concentrated vehicle of creative authority. When a thought remains silent within the mind, it has power, but it is diffuse, formless, potential power. The moment that thought is given the shape of a spoken word, something fundamental changes in its nature and its relationship to the universal substance. It is externalized. It is given form. It is, in the precise language of first cause and effect, impressed upon the medium through which all material conditions are organized. Shinn understood that the universal subconscious mind, the great responsive impersonal law that underlies all visible creation, does not distinguish between a command you intend seriously and one you deliver carelessly. It reads the pattern, it receives the imprint, and it begins with the mechanical fidelity of a computer executing code to build the corresponding condition in your physical world. Consider the precise mechanics of this process. The word you speak does not travel outward into empty space and dissolve. It enters a medium, what Shinn called the ether, and what modern physics might call the quantum field, that is not passive, not neutral, and not silent. It is a responsive substance, a living creative medium that takes the shape of whatever impression is placed upon it with sufficient authority and clarity. This is not metaphor. Every tradition of genuine metaphysical science, from the Kabbalistic understanding of the creative power of sound to the Hindu concept of Nada Brahma, the universe as sound, to the opening verse of the Gospel of John, "In the beginning was the Word," converges on this single staggering conclusion. Speech is a creative act of first cause. When you speak, you are not describing reality. You are initiating it. This is where the law of the wand becomes not just philosophically interesting, but personally, urgently, and practically critical. Poverty is not a fact of existence. It is not a fundamental reality woven into the fabric of the cosmos. It is a condition, a temporary crystallization of a pattern that has been sustained, reinforced, and perpetuated primarily through the medium of human speech. When a person says day after day, year after year, "I can never afford anything. Money always runs out. Rich people are lucky, and I am not," they are not making harmless observations. They are issuing sustained, repeated, legally binding decrees to the universal substance, commanding it to continue producing the exact condition they are describing. The condition has an anchor, and that anchor is language. Consequently, the corollary of this law is equally absolute. If you stop speaking of poverty, sickness, and failure, not just reduce the frequency, but systematically, deliberately, and ruthlessly stop, those conditions begin to lose their anchor in your reality. They do not dissolve instantly in every case, because the patterns already crystallized in the physical world have momentum, but they lose their primary source of sustenance. They begin to weaken. A plant from which you cut the water supply does not die the moment you turn off the tap, but it will die. The outcome is a mathematical certainty. The same principle governs the conditions in your life that have been watered by your own words. Cut off the supply, and the deterioration of those conditions becomes inevitable. It follows that the practice Shinn prescribes is not one of mere positive thinking, a term that has been so diluted by casual usage as to become almost meaningless. What she prescribes is ruthless editorial discipline applied to the most powerful instrument you possess. You must become a relentless, unsentimental editor of your own dialogue. Every sentence you are about to speak must pass through an internal filter of supreme authority before it exits your mouth. Not, "Is this kind?" Not, "Is this honest?" But, "Is this the verdict I intend to have executed?" Because that is precisely what happens to every word that clears your lips. It is handed to the court officer of the universal law, who turns it into a warrant and goes out to serve it upon your physical world. The question is never whether the warrant will be served. The law is not selective. The question is only, what does the warrant say? The word then must be understood as radioactive, and Shinn herself used exactly this term with deliberate precision. In the era when she was writing, radioactivity was one of the most astonishing and potent scientific discoveries of the age, demonstrating that invisible forces contained within matter could rearrange, transform, and restructure physical reality in ways that the naked eye could not perceive until the transformation was complete. She chose this analogy carefully. Your words are not neutral acoustic events. They are charged particles of creative energy that enter the invisible substance of the universe and rearrange it according to their pattern. The degree of their power is determined not by the volume at which you speak them, but by the conviction, the inward knowing, with which you issue them. A whispered decree from a person of absolute inner authority carries more creative power than a shouted wish from a person of doubt. This is why the practice of the vocal discipline protocol is not primarily a matter of changing your external speech patterns, though that is indeed what you will do. It is at its deepest level a matter of aligning your inward state with the authority of the decree you are issuing. The judge who speaks from the bench does not wonder whether his verdict will be carried out. The wondering itself would be a contradiction of the role. A judge who signs an order and then thinks, "I hope the court officer actually follows through," has already undermined the authority of the document. In the same way, when you issue a verbal decree about your abundance, your health, or your circumstances, the moment you follow it with an inward commentary of doubt, you have issued a counter-decree that dilutes and eventually cancels the first. Shinn was precise on this point. You must speak as one who knows. Not hopes, not wishes, knows. Therefore, the training that this system demands is dual in nature. You must simultaneously discipline your outer speech and cultivate your inner certainty. The outer discipline comes first, because it is concrete, executable, and immediately within your control. You cannot always command your inward state to shift instantaneously, though that is the ultimate goal, but you can, starting in the next 60 seconds, choose to stop giving voice to the conditions you do not want. You can impose a moratorium on the language of failure, lack, and limitation. And as you do, something begins to happen in the interior world. The inner commentary starts to shift. When you stop speaking defeat, you stop rehearsing defeat. When you stop rehearsing defeat, you stop feeling defeated. When you stop feeling defeated, the conviction behind your decrees of victory grows organically, naturally, and with the self-reinforcing momentum of a law that, once set in motion, compounds upon itself. The analogy that makes this mechanism most crystalline is that of the mold and the casting. In metallurgy, a craftsman pours molten metal, formless, fluid, and capable of taking any shape, into a mold. The metal does not choose its shape. It has no preference. It simply conforms with absolute fidelity to the exact contours of the mold into which it has been poured. The universal substance is the molten metal. Your spoken word is the mold. Whatever shape your word gives to the mold, the substance will fill it perfectly, completely, and without deviation. This is the law of the wand expressed in its most mechanical and undeniable form. You are not asking the substance to take a shape. You are providing the mold, and the filling is automatic. The question of whether abundance will fill the mold of your decree is not a question of the substance's willingness. It is a question of the mold's integrity, meaning the clarity, authority, and consistency of your spoken word. Here is the dimension of this law that most people miss entirely, because it requires you to confront a deeply uncomfortable truth about the nature of casual conversation. The mold is being formed not only when you sit in quiet meditation and make deliberate affirmations. The mold is being formed every single moment that language exits your mouth. At breakfast, in the car, in text messages, in the half-conscious muttering you do when you are alone and frustrated. The law does not distinguish between a consciously intended decree and an offhand remark. It reads the pattern of the word, not the intention behind it. This means that 10 minutes of powerful morning decrees can be neutralized, mathematically, mechanically neutralized, by 2 hours of complaint and negative commentary throughout the day. The net mold you are pressing into the substance is the aggregate of all your spoken words, weighted by the emotional charge behind them. This is why Shinn's teaching is not a morning practice. It is a total, comprehensive, all-day discipline. Consequently, you begin to understand why Shinn said that you must become a ruthless editor, and why that word, ruthless, is not hyperbole. To maintain the integrity of the mold you are consciously constructing requires a willingness to interrupt comfortable social habits, to disappoint people who expect you to commiserate, to sit in silence rather than add your voice to a conversation that is vibrating at the frequency of failure. This is not antisocial behavior. It is the behavior of a craftsman who understands that the quality of the mold determines the quality of the casting, and who refuses to compromise the mold for the sake of social convenience. You are not being cold. You are being precise. You are protecting the blueprint of your own becoming with the same rigor that an architect protects the blueprints of a building that thousands of people will one day inhabit. The final dimension of the law of the wand that must be fully grasped before we proceed is this. The wand does not work intermittently. It works constantly. There is no off position. You cannot set down the wand and walk away from its creative activity while you engage in the ordinary business of your day. The wand, your voice, your language, your spoken verdict, is always active, always transmitting, always impressing the mold of its pattern upon the universal substance. This is not a burden, though it may initially feel like one. It is, in its deepest sense, the most profound form of creative liberation available to a human being. It means that reality is never fixed. It means that the conditions around you are never permanent. It means that at any moment, at this moment, you hold in your hands the instrument of total transformation. The only variable is whether you are wielding it consciously or recklessly. Most people wield it recklessly, and their lives reflect that recklessness with perfect, mathematical accuracy. Imagine a vessel of almost incomprehensible mass, a modern ocean liner stretching a quarter-mile from bow to stern, weighing hundreds of thousands of tons, carrying thousands of passengers and an incomprehensible quantity of cargo, pressing through open ocean against winds and currents of enormous force. Now consider the instrument by which this colossus of engineering is steered. Not a massive mechanism proportional to the ship's scale, not a system of immense hydraulic arms and counterweights spread across the breadth of the hull. The entire directional fate of this floating city is controlled by a single, relatively modest, submerged rudder. A blade of engineered steel that, by the simple act of turning a few degrees in one direction, commits the entire vessel to a new course. The ship does not negotiate with the rudder. It does not resist. It does not say, "I am very large and you are very small, so your instructions do not apply to me." The physics of the system are absolute. Where the rudder turns, the ship follows. This is not metaphor. This is the operating law of your life. Your tongue is the rudder. Your life, your finances, your health, your relationships, your career, the entire massive, complex, heavily loaded vessel of your accumulated circumstances is the ship. And the law that governs the relationship between them is identical in its mechanics to the law that governs the rudder and the ship. Where your speech goes, your life must follow. Not eventually, not partially, not under favorable conditions, must follow. The word must is not rhetorical emphasis here. It is a statement of physical and metaphysical law. Just as the ocean liner has no structural mechanism by which it can resist the command of its rudder, your life has no mechanism by which it can permanently resist the command of your consistent, sustained, authoritative spoken word. The ship may take time to complete a full course correction. The momentum of its previous heading is real and must be overcome. But the outcome of the new rudder position is not in question. It is a mechanical certainty. The precision of this analogy deepens when you examine the nature of what consistent and sustained truly means. A rudder turned for 10 seconds and then released does not complete a course correction. The ship swings slightly, feels the impulse of the new direction, and then, as the water resistance and the residual momentum of its previous heading reassert themselves, drifts back toward the original course. This is precisely what happens when a person makes a powerful verbal decree in the morning, spends the day in complaint and negative commentary, and then wonders why their circumstances have not changed. The rudder was turned for 10 seconds. The ship moved, but then the rudder was released and the ship returned to its heading. Nothing about this outcome is mysterious or unjust. It is the simple, predictable result of an inconsistent rudder command. The law executed exactly as it should. The decree was not sustained, and therefore the course correction was not completed. It follows that the single most important technical requirement of the vocal discipline protocol is not the elegance of the decrees you choose, not the emotional intensity you bring to them in the morning, and not the number of times you repeat them. It is consistency, the maintenance of the rudder position across the full duration of the day, the week, the month, until the new heading is locked in and the ship's momentum itself begins to carry the course correction forward with self-sustaining force. This is the point at which the practice transforms from effortful discipline into natural expression. When your new verbal patterns have been maintained long enough, they begin to feel true. Not because you are performing a psychological trick on yourself, but because the outer circumstances, having been gradually reorganized by the sustained command, now reflect back a reality that genuinely corresponds to your decrees. The law has delivered. The ship has arrived at the new heading, and the rudder now holds its position not through effort, but through alignment. Now apply this analogy to the specific situation of a person trapped in financial lack. This person has been speaking the language of poverty for years, perhaps decades. I can't afford it. Money is tight. I'm always broke at the end of the month. Rich people are different from me. These are not random observations. They are the rudder position that has been holding steady day after day, year after year, pointing the massive ship of their financial life in the precise direction of scarcity. The ship has been sailing confidently toward that destination for a long time, and it has built up considerable momentum in that direction. Now this person encounters Shinn's teaching and begins, tentatively, awkwardly, perhaps with a sense of foolishness, to issue decrees of abundance. I have a wonderful income. Wealth flows to me from expected and unexpected sources. My every need is met with divine immediacy. The rudder has turned, but the ship's momentum, years of accumulated financial scarcity, the crystallized material conditions of the old heading, does not vanish in a day. Here is where most people abandon the practice, and in doing so, prove nothing except that they did not understand the law they were attempting to apply. They issue decrees for a few days, the ship does not visibly change direction, and they conclude that this doesn't work. But what has actually happened is perfectly consistent with the law. The rudder has turned, but the ship's momentum has not yet been fully overcome. The course correction is underway. The invisible substructural rearrangement of the circumstances is in progress. The decree has been received, recorded, and is being executed at the level of causation, which means at a level that is not yet visible to the naked eye. To abandon the practice at this point is to release the rudder at the precise moment when the course correction requires the most sustained pressure. It is the metaphysical equivalent of turning the wheel of an ocean liner, waiting 30 seconds, concluding that ships cannot turn, and then pointing the wheel back toward the original course, and then being mystified by the fact that nothing changed. The mechanical impossibility that Shinn's rudder analogy exposes is one that, once seen with full clarity, cannot be unseen. You cannot simultaneously hold the rudder of your speech in the direction of scarcity and expect the ship to arrive at abundance. This is not a philosophical position. It is a statement about the structural impossibility of the scenario. The ship goes where the rudder points, always, without exception. The law is not negotiable in the way that human social arrangements are negotiable, through persuasion, charm, luck, or special pleading. The law is not a person. It does not have moods. It does not make exceptions for people who are really trying hard, or who have suffered a great deal, or who deserve better. It reads the rudder position and executes the corresponding course. If you want a different destination, you must commit to a different rudder position and hold it, without wavering, without apologizing, without releasing it in moments of social pressure or personal discouragement. The storms and waves mentioned in the original analogy deserve specific attention here, because they correspond to something very real in the experience of applying this law. Storms are the moments of apparent evidence that the old heading is still correct. The unexpected bill that arrives, the relationship that worsens before it improves, the job situation that seems to deteriorate in the early stages of applying new decrees. These moments are not proof that the law is failing. They are the wave resistance that every ship encounters in the process of a major course correction. A massive vessel turning in open ocean creates turbulence. The water that was flowing smoothly alongside the old heading now meets the new angle of the hull and creates conflict. Visible, physical, sometimes alarming conflict. The untrained observer sees this turbulence and concludes that the course correction is wrong, that the ship is in trouble. The trained navigator understands that the turbulence is evidence of the correction itself. You cannot change course without creating turbulence. The absence of turbulence is not the goal. The new destination is the goal. Therefore, when you begin issuing new verdicts about your life, and the outer world responds initially with what appears to be increased resistance, you must not interpret this as the failure of your decrees. You must read it as the mechanical signature of a course correction in progress, the turbulence of a ship turning in open water. Your response is not to reverse the rudder. Your response is to hold it steady, to double the authority of your decrees, to speak with even greater certainty. Because the law has not failed. The law is working exactly as it should. The very resistance you are experiencing is evidence that the old pattern is being dislodged from its position. A pattern that is fully entrenched does not create turbulence when challenged. It is simply too heavy to move. The turbulence means it is moving. Hold the rudder. The elegance of Shinn's rudder principle lies in its democratic and equalizing implications. The size of the ship does not determine the difficulty of the course correction in the way that most people assume. A larger ship does take longer to change heading, but it is not more resistant to the law of the rudder. It is simply subject to greater momentum. By the same principle, the depth or duration of the negative conditions in your life does not place them beyond the reach of the law. A person who has spent 20 years in financial scarcity is not more permanently condemned to that condition than someone who has only been struggling for 2 years. They simply have more momentum to overcome, which means the course correction requires more consistent, sustained application of the new rudder position. But the law itself applies with identical force. The destination is achievable. The course correction is possible. The only question is the duration and the discipline of your commitment to the new heading. Extend this analogy now to the area of human health, because Shinn applied this principle with equal rigor to physical conditions. A person who has been verbally rehearsing their illness, "My back is terrible. My digestion has always been bad. I have my mother's weak constitution. I get sick every winter without fail," is holding the rudder of their physical life in the precise direction of those conditions. They are not describing their health, they are sustaining it. The spoken words of sickness are the mold that the biological intelligence of the body is continuously attempting to fill. Now for the rudder analogy to apply here. You must understand something about the body that Shinn grasped intuitively and that modern psychoneuroimmunology has begun to confirm scientifically. The body's healing intelligence is responsive to the pattern of the mind's commands, and the spoken word is the most concentrated and specific form that those commands take. When you stop speaking sickness and begin issuing decrees of health with authority and consistency, you are turning the rudder of the body's direction. The cells are the crew. They follow the captain's orders. The rudder principle also clarifies an aspect of the Shinn system that people often find confusing: the relationship between personal effort and verbal decree. Some people hear this teaching and conclude that if they simply say the right words, they can abandon all practical action and wait for the universe to deliver. This is a fundamental misreading of the law, and it has caused significant damage to the reputations of this teaching among practically minded people. The ship still requires its engines. The verbal decree is the rudder that determines direction. It does not provide the propulsive force that moves the ship through the water. You still act, you still work, you still engage with the practical dimensions of your life, but your action, when aligned with a clear rudder position of authoritative verbal decree, is no longer the frantic, unfocused, exhausting labor of someone spinning a wheel randomly in every direction. It is directed action. It is action that moves the ship along the new heading with increasing efficiency and speed. The decree and the action are not in competition. They are complementary forces, one governing direction, the other providing momentum. The final implication of the rudder law that must be stated before we move to the practical architecture of the vocal discipline protocol is this: there is no neutral position. This is the most uncomfortable truth in the entire teaching, and it is the one that carries the most urgency for your immediate action. The ship cannot drift without a rudder position. In the absence of conscious, deliberate speech directed toward a chosen destination, the rudder defaults to the most habitual, most deeply grooved position in your psyche, which, for most people, is the accumulated language of whatever negative patterns were imprinted earliest and most deeply. You do not get to opt out of the creative function of speech by simply not thinking about it. The default position is not neutral. The default position is whatever your unconscious verbal habits have established as the baseline heading of your life. Silence, therefore, is better than negative speech, but silence is not the goal. The goal is the conscious, sustained, authoritative decree of the destination you have chosen. Take the wheel, set the heading, and hold it. The state from which all effective vocal work must proceed is not enthusiasm, not emotional intensity, and not the desperate urgency of someone who needs results immediately. Those states may be present as fuel, but they cannot be the foundation. The foundation must be something far more controlled, far more interior, and far more powerful, the state that Shinn's teaching points toward and that the vocal discipline protocol requires as its prerequisite condition. This state is what we will call the silent sentinel, the inner posture of a being who has achieved complete dominion over the impulse to speak unconsciously. It is the state of the master who has recognized that silence, wielded correctly, is not the absence of power but its most concentrated form. Before the wand is raised, the master is still. Before the decree is issued, the judge has already deliberated. The words that emerge from this state carry a weight and an authority that words born from reactivity, habit, or social performance can never match. To understand what the silent sentinel demands in practice, you must first confront the degree to which ordinary human conversation is not communication at all, but noise. The continuous, reflexive, largely unconscious filling of silence with words that have no creative intention behind them. Consider how much of your daily speech is generated not by deliberate thought, but by social reflex. The automatic complaint when something goes wrong, the habitual commentary on circumstances you have no intention of changing, the running verbal monologue that narrates your day back to yourself and to everyone within earshot. None of this speech is neutral. Every syllable of it is a rudder command being sent to the ship of your life, and the vast majority of it, examined with cold, honest precision, is pointing the ship toward destinations you would never consciously choose. The silent sentinel is the practice of becoming aware of this in real time before the words exit your mouth, and making a conscious executive decision about whether to speak or remain in the far greater power of intentional silence. Shinn's instruction on this point, reduced to its most precise formulation, is this: do not speak unless your words improve upon the silence. This is not an instruction to become a hermit or a social eccentric who unnerves people with long, uncomfortable pauses. It is an instruction to develop the discipline of the inner filter, to build, through conscious practice, the neural habit of pausing between the impulse to speak and the act of speaking, long enough to ask the single question: is this the verdict I intend to execute? If the answer is no, if the words forming in your mouth are the language of complaint, comparison, self-deprecation, gossip, or fear, then the silent sentinel does not permit them to pass, not out of repression, but out of the clear understanding that those words are warrants for conditions you do not want served upon your life. The practical dimension of this state involves a particular quality of listening that most people have never cultivated. The silent sentinel does not only filter outgoing speech, it monitors the constant ambient verbal environment in which you are immersed, the conversations around you, the language of the media you consume, the words that loop through your own internal monologue, and maintains a quality of non-participation in the frequency of lack, failure, and limitation that pervades ordinary social discourse. This is not a passive, withdrawn state. It is intensely active, intensely present, and intensely engaged. It simply refuses to add its creative authority to patterns and blueprints that it has not chosen. The sentinel stands at the gate. Nothing passes that has not received executive clearance. The deeper purpose of cultivating the silent sentinel as the prerequisite state for the vocal discipline protocol is that it changes the quality of the decrees you eventually issue. When you have spent hours, days, weeks training yourself not to speak carelessly, the words you do choose to speak become charged with an authority that reflects their rarity. Gold is valuable partly because it is rare. A judge whose every utterance from the bench carries the weight of deliberation carries far more authority than one whose words are predictable, habitual, and reflexive. When you speak from the state of the silent sentinel, the universal substance receives your word as the concentrated decree of a being who does not speak without intention, and it responds accordingly with the precision and the speed that is the signature of the law when it receives an unambiguous command. Step 1. The fast. The arrest. The first step of the vocal discipline protocol begins not with the issuance of any new decree, but with the imposition of a complete moratorium on the old ones. For the period of this initial practice, beginning now, in this moment, and extending through the coming hours, you will implement what the protocol designates as the fast, a total cessation of verbal reporting on the conditions you do not wish to perpetuate. To be precise, you will stop talking about what is, not what you want, not what you hope for. What you will immediately and ruthlessly eliminate is the running verbal commentary on the conditions of lack, limitation, pain, and failure that currently occupy your circumstances. If your finances are strained, you will not say so. If your body is in discomfort, you will not announce it. If your situation at work is difficult, you will not describe it to your colleagues over coffee. Not because these things are not real. They are in the sense that they are the current crystallized product of the previous rudder position. But because continuing to give them your voice is continuing to provide the mold that ensures they remain real. The critical precision of this step, and the point on which most people stumble, is the distinction between lying and silence. Shinn was absolutely clear. The fast does not require you to lie. If a colleague asks directly how you are not instructed to deliver a theatrical performance of cheerfulness that your actual state does not support. You are instructed to find neutral ground, and silence on the subject is always available as neutral ground. I'm working on some things is neutral. I'm focused is neutral. An honest change of subject is available. What you are forbidden to do by the precise requirements of this law is to give vocal substance to the conditions of lack by making them the subject of your speech. Every time you speak of a problem, you are pressing its mold more deeply into the universal substance. The fast is the arrest of this process. It is the moment you stop deepening the groove of the pattern you are trying to dissolve. You are not denying reality. You are refusing to cast your vote for its continuation. Step 2. The righteous decree. The second step is the issuance of the new verdict. And here, the specific genius of Shinn's methodology becomes fully apparent in a way that distinguishes it sharply from ordinary positive thinking. Shinn did not instruct her students to whisper timid affirmations in the privacy of their journals. She instructed them to speak their decrees out loud, with full vocal authority, using language that carries a particular quality she identified as essential to the effectiveness of the command: rhythm. Her formulas, the specific verbal structures she crafted and prescribed, almost invariably carry a rhythmic, rhyming, or metrically structured quality. I have a wonderful job in a wonderful way. I give wonderful service for wonderful pay. Infinite Spirit, open the way for my immediate supply. Let all that is mine by divine right now come to me in great avalanches of abundance. These are not random aesthetic choices. Rhythm is a carrier wave. A structured sound pattern penetrates the universal substance with a coherence and a force that unstructured prose cannot match. This is the acoustic dimension of the decree, and it matters. When you issue a righteous decree, you are performing a specific and precise act of creative engineering. You are giving the universal substance not just a destination, but a fully formed blueprint, a pattern with edges, rhythms, and coherence that the responsive medium of the ether can read with maximum clarity and minimum distortion. The more precisely and consistently you issue the decree, the clearer the mold, and the more faithful the manifestation. This is why the use of Shinn's exact formulas, rather than improvised personal phrases, is recommended for beginners. Her formulas have been designed with an intuitive understanding of the acoustic and metaphysical properties of language that generates results. As you advance in the practice, you will develop your own formulas, calibrated to the specific conditions of your life, that carry the same structural properties of authority, rhythm, and clarity. But you must speak them. Thinking them is not sufficient. The word must be spoken to be a wand. The gavel must be struck to issue the verdict. Step 3. The erasure command. The third step addresses the inevitable reality of the learning process with the same precision and rigor as the first two, because no protocol designed for human beings can function without a recovery mechanism. You will slip, not occasionally, frequently, especially in the early stages. The habit of unconscious negative speech is among the most deeply grooved neural patterns that most people carry, and it has been reinforced thousands of times over years and decades. It will not yield without resistance. There will be moments, in the midst of a difficult conversation, in a moment of sudden frustration, in the grip of genuine fear, when the old language escapes your lips before the silent sentinel can intercept it. This is going to be a disaster. I knew this wouldn't work. I can never catch a break. The words are out. The warrant has been issued. What do? You invoke the erasure command immediately, not later, not when you feel better about it, but in the very next breath. The precise language of the erasure is critical. I cancel that verdict. I erase that order. Spoken aloud, with authority, in the same voice that issued the original slip. What you are doing in this moment is not simply covering a mistake with a better statement. You are performing a precise metaphysical act of revocation, using the same creative authority of the spoken word that issued the erroneous warrant to formally withdraw it before it can be served. The court officer of the universal law, having received the warrant, now receives the withdrawal. The record is cleared. This is not a magical erasure of consequences that are already in physical motion, but it is the immediate arrest of the decree at the level of causation, before it has fully crystallized into effect. The earlier you catch the slip and issue the erasure, the less the erroneous decree has had the opportunity to press its pattern into the substance. Speed is an asset here. The moment you hear the negative word leave your lips, the erasure command follows with no gap, no hesitation, and no apology to the people in the room who may find it eccentric. Your destiny outweighs their comfort with your social conventions. Once the erasure command has been issued and the record cleared, you return immediately to the state of the silent sentinel, and from that state, if appropriate, to the issuance of a new righteous decree to replace the cancelled one. But there is a quality of the post-technique state that must be addressed here, because it governs the long-term sustainability of the entire vocal discipline protocol and determines whether the practice will deepen into a permanent transformation or plateau into mere habit. In the aftermath of a decree, whether that decree is the initial fast, the issuance of a righteous decree, or the execution of an erasure command, you enter a period that can be described as the consolidation phase. This is the period during which the mold you have pressed into the substance is beginning to set, during which the rudder command is being received and processed by the navigational intelligence of the universal law. During this phase, your primary task is not to issue further commands, but to maintain the integrity of the decree you have already issued. This means, above all, treating your words as you would treat gold coins of finite supply. You possess a fixed and limited quantity of them, and every word you spend is a word permanently dispersed. The profligate spendthrift who throws gold coins into the mud of gossip and complaint ends the day impoverished. The disciplined steward who spends each coin only on a transaction that advances their chosen destination ends the day wealthier than they began. Your words, from this point forward, are currency, the currency of creation. The exchange rate is precise and non-negotiable. Every word of power and authority you spend purchases a corresponding increment of reality that conforms to that authority. Every word of complaint, fear, or self-deprecation you spend purchases a corresponding increment of reality that conforms to those patterns. There is no idle spending. There is no throwaway conversation. Every coin counts, and the ledger is always balanced with perfect mathematical accuracy. We arrive now at the revelation promised at the opening of this video, the exposure of the most dangerous, the most socially accepted, and the most cosmically consequential verbal habit in the modern world. Shinn called it the idle jest, and the name contains its own warning. The word idle does not mean harmless in this context. It means unintentional, a jest fired from the weapon of your voice without the deliberate aim of a conscious decree, but carrying all the creative power of one. The idle jest is the sarcastic, self-deprecating joke, the comment you make at your own expense to signal humility, to generate laughter, to fit in with the social current of the group you are in. "I'm such a disaster," you say, grinning. "I'm hopeless with money," you declare, and everyone laughs, and you feel the warm social reward of having made the joke successfully. Nothing about that exchange felt dangerous, but in the courtroom of the universal subconscious, what just happened had nothing to do with humor or social bonding. What happened was the issuance of a direct command, a decree of hopelessness, of disaster, of financial incapacity, from the most authoritative voice in the courtroom, the judge's own. The mechanism of the idle jest's destructive power lies in a principle that Shinn understood with clinical precision. The subconscious mind is entirely, completely, and permanently literal. It does not possess a sense of humor. It was not designed with irony detection capability. It does not have a module for just joking or, "You know how I am," or "I'm being sarcastic." When you say "I am broke," regardless of your facial expression, regardless of the laughter in the room, regardless of the complete absence of any conscious intention to issue a poverty decree. The subconscious receives the pattern of the word, "I am broke," and treats it as a direct command from the CEO of your internal operations, which you are. It then begins, with the same impersonal fidelity with which it executes every other command, to organize the events, conditions, and circumstances of your outer life to conform to the pattern of that command. The joke was made for 3 seconds of social reward. The warrant runs indefinitely, until it is cancelled or overwritten by a more sustained counter-decree. Consider the accumulated weight of this pattern over the span of a life. Most people make multiple self-deprecating jokes per day. Over a month, that is hundreds of jokes, hundreds of poverty decrees, hundreds of failure commands, hundreds of incapacity warrants, issued by their own voice, with the full authority of the speaking self, into the universal subconscious that executes without question. Over a year, the number becomes staggering. Over a decade, you have issued tens of thousands of legally binding commands for the perpetuation of the exact conditions from which you are desperately trying to escape. And the most devastating aspect of this pattern is that it is invisible to you precisely because it is disguised as humor. You cannot defend against an attack you cannot see coming. Shinn's role, and the role of this video, is to make the mechanism visible. Because the moment you see it clearly, the joke stops being funny and the choice becomes impossible to avoid. You must stop, not reduce. Stop. The second fatal mistake catalogued under the heading of the idle jest is gossip. Specifically, the habit of speaking at length about other people's failures, problems, and misfortunes. This practice is so universal and so deeply embedded in social culture that most people do not recognize it as a spiritual and metaphysical act at all. It feels like information sharing. It feels like connection. It feels like concern sometimes when dressed in the language of worry about a mutual friend. But Shinn's warning on this subject is precise, unambiguous, and carries the same force as everything else in her system. When you give sustained, detailed, emotionally engaged verbal attention to another person's failure or lack, you are not merely describing their condition. You are vibrating at the frequency of that condition. You are inviting its pattern into your own creative field. You are, in the language of the vocal discipline protocol, pressing the mold of failure into the substance of your own life, while believing yourself to be talking about someone else. The mechanism here operates through what Shinn understood as the indivisibility of the universal subconscious. When you enter, through your speech, into the detailed description of lack, sickness, failure, or misfortune, regardless of whose lack, sickness, failure, or misfortune you are describing, you are nonetheless in that frequency. You are nonetheless speaking those patterns, impressing those molds, and receiving back from the responsive substance the corresponding conditions. The universal law does not distinguish between "I am broke" and "Did you hear that John is completely broke?" Both statements are being spoken by the same voice, in the same field, with comparable emotional energy. Both are pressing comparable patterns into the same substance. The fact that you intended the second statement to be about John's circumstances and not your own is entirely irrelevant to the law, which reads patterns, not intentions. This is why Shinn offered what initially sounds like a paradoxical instruction. Bless your enemies, not for their benefit, not because they deserve it, but because the act of blessing, of sending the spoken decree of good, of abundance, of health and wholeness, keeps your own frequency immaculate. When you speak well of someone you dislike, you are not capitulating to them or rewarding their behavior. You are protecting yourself. You are refusing to step into the frequency of their darkness, refusing to give your voice, your wand, your rudder, your gavel, to the perpetuation of patterns of failure and conflict. The blessing is a shield. The spoken word of good, directed even at your adversaries, maintains the integrity of your own creative field in a way that gossip and condemnation structurally cannot. This is not sentimentality. This is the precise, mathematical self-interest of someone who understands how the law works. The social pressure around these two fatal mistakes, the idle jest and gossip, is, it must be acknowledged, enormous. The entire architecture of ordinary social bonding rests upon these two pillars. People connect through shared complaint. They bond through self-deprecating humor. They solidify group membership through gossip about outsiders. To withdraw from these practices is not merely a personal discipline, it is a social statement that will not go unnoticed and will not be universally welcomed. People will find you odd. They will feel, without fully understanding why, that you are not playing by the social rules. And there will be pressure, sometimes gentle, sometimes pointed, to re-engage with the familiar patterns. This is the moment when the understanding of the law must be deeply enough internalized to sustain your discipline in the face of social friction, because the choice ultimately is between the temporary social comfort of the joke and the permanent, mathematically certain alteration of your life's trajectory. No laugh is worth the warrant it costs you. The final dimension of the idle jest's mechanism that must be fully grasped is the way it compounds over time, not linearly but exponentially. Each joke at your own expense does not merely add one negative decree to your record. It reinforces the neural pattern of self-diminishment, making the next joke easier to make and harder to catch. It normalizes, both internally and in your social environment, the language of your own limitation. The people around you begin to expect it, to anticipate it, to prompt it from you as part of your established social identity. "Oh, you know how terrible I am with money" becomes your brand. A running narrative about your incapacity that others are invested in maintaining because it confirms their expectations of you, provides them with comfort about their own limitations, and requires nothing from them. Breaking this pattern requires not just the discipline of the vocal discipline protocol, but the willingness to let your social identity transform, to become, in the eyes of your current circle, a different person, which is precisely what you are doing. That is the point. By your words you are justified, and by your words you are condemned. This declaration, which Shinn drew from the most ancient archives of sacred text and translated into the precise operational language of her metaphysical system, is not a theological statement. It is a description of a mechanism. It is the most compressed and accurate account of the law of the spoken word that language can produce. To be justified, in the literal judicial sense from which Shinn borrowed the term, means to be made right, to have the verdict entered in your favor, to have the sentence of abundance, health, and wholeness executed upon your life. To be condemned, again in the literal sense, means to have the adverse verdict entered, the sentence of lack, sickness, and failure executed. And the agent of both outcomes, the single determining variable in the judicial process, is the same in both cases: your words. Not your circumstances, not your history, not your resources, not your connections. Your words. This is the full weight of what Shinn taught, and it must be carried without diminishment. The completeness of this principle becomes even more staggering when you consider what Shinn added to it. The word is the flesh. She was not speaking metaphysically vague. She was making a precise statement about the relationship between the spoken decree and its physical manifestation. The word becomes the flesh. It incarnates, takes on physical form, organizes the material substance of your world into the shape of its pattern. Your spoken decree of abundance does not remain a pleasant sound wave that fades into the air. It enters the creative medium of the universal substance and begins the process of its own incarnation, becoming, through the channels and mechanisms of law, the physical conditions, events, and material circumstances of your outer life. This is why speaking a decree is not the same as thinking it. Thinking is causative, yes, but speaking is causative with a force that is amplified by the act of physical incarnation. The voice is the bridge between the inner world of thought and the outer world of form. It is the precise point at which the invisible becomes visible. In practical application, this means that Shinn's formulas must be spoken with the understanding that they are not expressions of a desired future. They are decrees of a present reality that has not yet fully crystallized into the visible dimension. The judge does not sentence someone to a future that will one day perhaps materialize. The judge sentences, and the sentence is immediately current, immediately in force, immediately being executed by the court system of the universal law. When you decree, "I have a wonderful job in a wonderful way," you are not expressing hope for a job you do not yet have. You are, in the present tense of the law, declaring the existence of a reality that is currently in the process of materializing, that has already been entered into the record of the subconscious as a fact in formation. The tense matters. The attitude of authority matters. The inner knowing that what you are decreeing is already true at the level of first cause and is moving toward manifestation in the world of effect must be present beneath the words, like the steel frame beneath the facade of a great building. The specific genius of Shinn's rhythmic declarative formulas deserves its own examination here, because the question of why rhythm assists the decree is not merely aesthetic, it is structural. When language is organized into rhythm, when the syllables fall with a regularity that creates a pattern in time as well as in meaning, it penetrates the subconscious with a quality of coherence and authority that unstructured speech does not carry. The subconscious responds to pattern. It is itself a pattern-making and pattern-executing machine. A rhythmic decree is, in this precise sense, speaking to the subconscious in its own native language, delivering the creative command in the most structurally compatible form available. This is why Shinn's formulas work, and why improvised, emotionally authentic but structurally chaotic personal phrases often produce less reliable results. The content of the decree matters, but the form, the rhythm, the rhyme, the metered cadence of the spoken command is the delivery mechanism that ensures the content reaches its target with maximum penetration and minimum distortion. The mastery-level understanding of Shinn's teaching on the spoken word involves the cultivation of what can only be described as divine vocal authority, the state in which the judge has so thoroughly internalized the law that the decrees issue from a place of absolute, untroubled certainty. This state is not the same as confidence, which is a psychological quality that can be shaken. It is closer to what a physicist experiences when predicting the outcome of a perfectly specified experiment. Not hope that the result will be what the equations predict, but knowledge. The physicist knows the answer before the experiment is run, because the physics are known. When you have truly internalized the law of the wand, when the metaphysics of first cause and effect are as real and as certain to you as the physics of gravity, your decrees carry this quality of knowing. And the universe, which is not confused or conflicted, executes them with matching clarity and speed. The validation of Shinn's teaching on the spoken word does not require you to accept its premises on faith alone, because the physical sciences, when examined with the necessary precision and intellectual honesty, have produced a body of evidence that converges with startling accuracy on the same conclusions that Shinn reached through metaphysical observation. The most directly relevant of these scientific bodies of evidence is the field of cymatics, the study of the physical effects of sound and vibration on matter. Cymatics was formally pioneered by Swiss physician Hans Jenny in the mid-20th century, though its roots reach back to the 18th century experiments of Ernest Holmes, who first demonstrated that vibrating metal plates would cause sand to organize itself into precise, intricate geometric patterns. What Jenny's systematic investigations proved, with photographic documentation and rigorous reproducibility, is that sound does not merely travel through matter, it organizes it. Different frequencies produce fundamentally different structural patterns in the physical medium. The pattern follows the frequency, the form follows the sound. The implication of this discovery for Shinn's teaching is not analogical. It is direct and structural. Your voice is a frequency generator of extraordinary precision. When you speak, you are not emitting neutral acoustic energy that happens to carry semantic content as a secondary feature. You are emitting a complex, layered set of frequencies, phonemic, tonal, rhythmic, and harmonic, that constitute a unique acoustic signature with specific pattern-forming properties. These frequencies do not cease their organizing activity at the boundary of audible sound. They continue to propagate through the responsive medium of the physical world, and at the subtler levels of matter, the quantum field level at which the distinction between physical and energetic becomes meaningless, they are arranging the substance of your reality into structures that correspond to their pattern. This is cymatics. This is what sound does, and your voice is sound. The specific relevance of cymatics to Shinn's concept of the spoken decree becomes most precise when you examine what happens to a Chladni pattern when the frequency is changed. The existing pattern, no matter how intricate, no matter how settled, no matter how long it has been in place, dissolves immediately and is replaced by the new pattern corresponding to the new frequency. The sand does not resist the new pattern because it is attached to the old one. The sand does not need to be convinced that the new pattern is valid. The moment the new frequency is applied with sufficient intensity and consistency, the reorganization is instantaneous and complete. Apply this to the conditions of your life. The patterns of poverty, ill health, and failure that are currently crystallized in your circumstances are not permanent. They are frequency-dependent structures. Change the sustained dominant frequency of your voice. Change the pattern of your consistent, authoritative spoken decrees, and the structural reorganization of your circumstances is not merely possible. It is the physical behavior of matter responding to sound. It is cymatics. Beyond cymatics, the phenomenon of acoustic levitation provides an even more dramatic validation of the organizing power of sound on physical matter. Acoustic levitation uses precisely controlled sound waves to overcome the force of gravity and suspend physical objects in mid-air, not through any visible mechanical support, but through the constructive interference of sound waves that create stable pressure nodes at specific points in space. Objects weighing grams, and in recent experimental work considerably more, are held suspended by nothing other than the precisely calibrated application of sound. When scientists need to demonstrate this, they do not explain it away as a spiritual metaphor or a matter of belief. They point to the physics. Sound has the physical capacity to override one of the fundamental forces of the universe. Your voice is a sound generator. The question is not whether your voice has the physical power to rearrange your circumstances. The question is whether you are deploying it with the precision that the law requires. This connection between acoustic physics and metaphysical law points toward a unified principle that both domains are circling from different directions. Physics is discovering, incrementally and with experimental rigor, that the universe is at its deepest level a field of vibrating energy, that what appears to be solid, fixed, and permanent matter is in fact a complex of standing wave patterns in a quantum field that is far more fluid, responsive, and malleable than the world of ordinary sensory experience suggests. Metaphysics, and specifically the teaching of Florence Scovel Shinn, has been saying something structurally identical for a century, in different language and from a different direction of approach. The world is not fixed. It is a pattern in a responsive medium. And the spoken word of a conscious being is a primary instrument for impressing new patterns upon that medium. The convergence of these two approaches, one from the laboratory, one from the metaphysical practice, on the same fundamental description of reality is not coincidence, it is evidence. The practical implication of the cymatics validation for the vocal discipline protocol is this: the frequency of your voice matters at a level of physical reality that is entirely independent of whether you believe in metaphysics. The patterns your spoken words form in the responsive substance of the field are not dependent on your acceptance of any spiritual framework. They are physical events, following physical laws. This means that the vocal discipline protocol is not an act of faith. It is an act of physics applied to the domain of personal circumstances. When you stop speaking the frequency of lack and begin consistently speaking the frequency of abundance, when you change the dominant acoustic pattern you are impressing upon the field, you are doing something that cymatics predicts will produce a structural reorganization of the material patterns in your reality. You do not have to believe this. You only have to do it and observe the results with the same objectivity you would bring to any physical experiment. The resonance principle extends this analysis even further. In physics, resonance occurs when a vibrating object causes a second object at some distance to begin vibrating at the same frequency, not through direct physical contact, but through the transmission of the vibration through the medium between them. A singer who sustains a note at the resonant frequency of a crystal glass will cause the glass to vibrate, and if the frequency is sustained, to shatter. The singer does not touch the glass. The the medium transmits the frequency. The glass responds according to its physical properties. Your voice, operating through the medium of the universal substance, initiates resonance in the circumstances and conditions of your life that correspond to the frequency it is emitting. When you sustain the decree of abundance with the authority, rhythm, and consistency that Shinn prescribed, the circumstances and conditions that correspond to abundance begin to resonate with that frequency, to stir, to organize, to move toward you, without any visible mechanical connection between your words and those circumstances. This is not magic. This is resonance. This is physics. The extraordinary precision of Shinn's acoustic understanding becomes most visible when you examine her insistence on rhythmic, rhyming, metrically structured formulas. From a purely acoustic perspective, a rhythmic phrase is a more coherent frequency pattern than an unstructured one. It has a more defined waveform. It produces a more precise cymatic pattern. It creates clearer resonance. When Shinn instructed her students to decree, "I have a wonderful job in a wonderful way, I give wonderful service for wonderful pay," rather than simply thinking, "I want a good job," she was not being quaint or poetic. She was, whether she framed it in these terms or not, prescribing the form of spoken command that carries the most structurally coherent acoustic pattern, and therefore the most precisely defined cymatic impression upon the field. The rhythm is not decoration. It is the engineering specification of the mold. The validation from physics also illuminates the mechanism of the erasure command, step 3 of the vocal discipline protocol, in a way that makes its urgency and effectiveness clear in non-metaphysical terms. When a cymatic pattern is disturbed by the introduction of a dissonant frequency, the existing pattern dissolves and a new one forms corresponding to the dominant new frequency. The erasure command works by precisely this mechanism. It introduces a new dominant authoritative frequency that is structurally incompatible with the pattern of the erroneous decree, causing that pattern to dissolve before it has fully crystallized into physical effect. The speed with which the erasure command is issued determines how much pattern formation time the erroneous decree has had. Issue it immediately, and the dissolution is virtually complete. Wait hours before issuing it, and the erroneous pattern has had time to establish momentum in the field, not irreversible, but requiring more sustained counter-frequency to dissolve. The neuroscience of language provides a further layer of validation that completes the picture. Research in neuroplasticity has established that the act of speaking, specifically the combination of thought, motor activity, and auditory feedback that constitutes speech, creates neural patterns of substantially greater strength and durability than thought alone. When you speak a decree aloud, you are not simply thinking it and adding audio. You are engaging the motor cortex, the auditory cortex, the language production centers, and the emotional processing networks simultaneously, creating a multimodal neural pattern that is more deeply imprinted, more readily retrievable, and more powerfully influential on subsequent cognition and behavior than any thought that remains unspoken. This is why Shinn's insistence on spoken decrees and the vocal discipline protocol's insistence that the righteous decree must be spoken aloud is not merely ceremonial, it is neurologically sound. The spoken decree rewires the brain, and a rewired brain issues different commands, generates different behavior, creates different circumstances. The quantum physics dimension of this validation deserves careful attention because it addresses the most common objection raised against this entire framework. The objection that there is no credible mechanism by which the words of a single human being could influence the large-scale physical circumstances of their life. The objection is reasonable from the perspective of classical physics, where matter is fixed and separate, and the idea of thought or sound influencing distant physical events seems implausible. But quantum physics has demonstrated conclusively that at the subatomic level, the act of observation influences the state of the observed system, that the measurer and the measured are not separable. Extend this principle to its logical implication. If observation influences the quantum state of matter, and if the spoken decree is a concentrated, structured, sustained form of directed conscious attention, a form of observation in the quantum sense, then the influence of the spoken word on the quantum field underlying material conditions is not a mystical claim. It is a logical extension of established quantum mechanical principles. The convergence of cymatics, acoustic levitation, resonance physics, neuroplasticity, and quantum mechanics on the same central conclusion that sound, consciousness, and the structure of material reality are not separate systems operating in isolation from each other, but interpenetrating processes in a unified responsive field, represents what may be the most important scientific finding of the modern era for personal transformation. Because what it means, stated in its simplest and most actionable form, is this. When Florence Scovel Shinn told her students that their word was a wand, she was describing the physics of reality in the language available to her time and context. The physics have caught up with the metaphysics. The laboratory is confirming what the courtroom of sacred logic has known for centuries. Your voice is a creative instrument of immense physical power. The only question remaining is whether you will treat it as such. The synthesis of all these lines of validation points toward a single unified directive that underlies every aspect of the vocal discipline protocol. Specificity and consistency are the master variables. In cymatics, the precision and consistency of the frequency determines the clarity and stability of the pattern. In resonance, the sustained application of the correct frequency determines the strength and the permanence of the resonance. In neuroplasticity, the repeated multimodal engagement of the same neural pattern determines the depth of its imprint and the ease of its subsequent activation. In the metaphysical law of the spoken word, the authority, clarity, and consistency of the decree determines the completeness and the speed of its manifestation. Across all of these frameworks, physical, neuroscientific, and metaphysical, the answer is the same. Speak precisely, speak authoritatively, and speak consistently. Everything else is detail. There was a woman in New York in the early decades of the 20th century, a woman whose circumstances, by every external measure, had arrived at the kind of dead end that most people would accept as simply the shape of their fate. She had been searching for work for months, not passively, but with the active, relentless effort of someone who has real rent due and real hunger to contend with. She applied. She showed up. She presented herself as best she knew how. And day after day, the answer was the same: nothing. And in the evenings, over coffee with the friends who formed her social world, she would report on the day's failures with the particular brand of exhausted certainty that prolonged disappointment produces. "There are no jobs out there," she would say. Not as a complaint, but as a fact. A carefully observed, empirically grounded conclusion drawn from months of personal evidence. "I'll never get hired," said not with self-pity, but with the grim accuracy of someone who has done the math. Her friends would nod. It was true. The economy was difficult. The competition was fierce. These were not unreasonable observations. Florence Scovel Shinn heard this woman's case and identified the mechanism of her failure with immediate precision. The woman was not, as she believed, reporting on an external reality that existed independently of her participation. She was, with every repetition of, "There are no jobs out there and I'll never get hired," issuing sustained, authoritative, emotionally credible decrees to the universal subconscious, decrees that were functioning with mechanical fidelity as a wall between her and every opportunity that existed in her vicinity. The jobs were there. Shinn knew this with the certainty of the law. The woman's decrees had not eliminated the jobs. They had built around her a structure of frequency, a standing cymatic pattern in the responsive field, that was systematically deflecting every connection, every chance encounter, every circumstance that might have served as the channel through which the right opportunity could have reached her. She was not unlucky. She was thoroughly and precisely protected from her own good by the wall of her own words. Shinn's instruction was direct and complete. Change the verdict. Stop speaking the old sentence. Issue the new one. Every day aloud with authority. I have a wonderful job in a wonderful way. I give wonderful service for wonderful pay. The woman's initial response was the response that most people have when first instructed to issue decrees that appear to contradict their present reality. She felt foolish. The decree seemed absurd. She had no wonderful job. She had no job at all. Saying otherwise seemed not just wishful but dishonest, a denial of the hard facts of her situation. But she understood enough of Shinn's framework to know that the feeling of foolishness was itself a symptom of the old pattern reasserting itself, the rudder resistance of a ship that has been on the same heading for too long. She did not wait for the foolish feeling to pass. She spoke the decree through it. She disciplined her tongue in the other direction as well, and this is the part of the story that the vocal discipline protocols, the fast, speaks to most directly. She stopped, not with ease, but with deliberate daily effort, describing the absence of opportunity to her friends. She stopped saying there are no jobs, not because she had become certain there were. She had not. The circumstances had not yet changed. But she had understood the mechanism, and she understood that continuing to speak the old sentence was continuing to fund the wall. So she said nothing on the subject. She changed the conversation. She issued the new decree privately, daily, with increasing authority as the days passed and the practice became less foreign to her. The inner commentary of doubt did not vanish immediately, but she had the discipline to hold the rudder of her speech in the new direction, even while the inner storm of skepticism continued. Within a week, 7 days of consistent daily practice of the new decree and the cessation of the old one, the wall began to show its first crack, not through the channels she had been monitoring, not through the applications she had submitted, through a chance conversation on a public bus with a stranger, who in the ordinary course of an ordinary conversation mentioned a position at a company that was not advertising, had not posted the opening, and would not have been visible to any person conducting a standard search. The woman had the conversation. She followed the thread. She was hired at a rate of pay that exceeded what she had been looking for, in a role that suited her precisely. The mechanism of this outcome is exactly what the vocal discipline protocol predicts, and it must be understood precisely rather than celebrated vaguely as a miracle of positive thinking. The job existed before the woman changed her decree. It had always existed, in the same city, in the same field, accessible through channels that had always been available to her. What had prevented its reaching her was not a shortage of opportunity in the world, but the acoustic wall she had built around herself with the sustained frequency of her own verbal decrees of lack. When she dismantled the wall, by withdrawing the sustaining decrees and replacing them with the new ones, the field reorganized. The resonance shifted. The circumstances that had been held at a frequency incompatible with the entry of that opportunity into her life began to move toward the new frequency. The chance encounter on the bus was not chance at all. It was the universe executing the new verdict, using the available channels of physical reality to deliver the sentence. This is always how the law works. It does not conjure resources from nowhere. It reorganizes the existing abundance of the field, which is always infinite, into the specific pattern of the decree that has been issued with sufficient authority and consistency to be fully received and executed. We have now traversed the full architecture of the vocal discipline protocol, from the foundational law of the wand, through the mechanical certainty of the rudder principle, through the precise steps of the fast, the righteous decree, and the erasure command, through the fatal mistakes of the idle jest and gossip, through the master formulas of Shinn's condensed metaphysical jurisprudence, and through the validation of acoustic physics and lived demonstration. It remains now to synthesize these elements into their ultimate practical conclusion, the single organizing principle that should govern every word that exits your lips from this moment forward. That principle, stated with the full authority of everything we have examined, is this: silence is better than a negative decree, but a positive decree issued with authority and sustained with consistency is better than silence. This is the hierarchy of the vocal instrument. This is the operating order of the law applied to your daily speech. Silence, when chosen as an alternative to the automatic issuance of a negative decree, is an act of power. It is the silent sentinel at the gate, refusing passage to a warrant that would work against the life you are building. Do not underestimate this choice. In a culture that rewards continuous verbal expression and interprets silence as weakness or social disengagement, the decision to hold silence in the face of a conversation vibrating at the frequency of lack requires a particular form of courage. The courage of the person who has understood something that the room has not yet grasped, and who is willing to appear odd or distant rather than compromise the integrity of the creative field they are maintaining. This silence is not passive. It is the stillness of the craftsman who is protecting the mold. It is the stillness of the judge who has not yet taken the bench and who will not be hurried into issuing a verdict before the deliberation is complete. But the positive decree, when issued from the state of the silent sentinel and delivered with the rhythmic authority of Shinn's formulas, is a force of creation that silence, however disciplined, cannot match. Silence preserves. The decree builds. Silence is the refusal to add fuel to a fire you are trying to extinguish. The decree is the laying of the foundation of the new edifice, while the smoke of the old one is still clearing. Both have their place. Both are necessary in the practice of the full vocal discipline protocol. But the mastery of the system lies in moving through silence as quickly as possible toward the issuance of the decree, not lingering in silence as a final destination, but using it as a transitional state, a moment of preparation and alignment from which the positive verdict is issued with maximum authority and effect. The synthesis also requires the acknowledgement of a truth that the entire structure of this teaching implies, but has not yet stated directly. You are always in the courtroom. There is no recess, there is no off the record. The gavel is always in your hand, and every syllable you produce in the presence or absence of any audience is being received by the one court from which there is no appeal. The universal law of first cause and effect. The understanding of this reality is not meant to burden you with an impossible vigilance that produces anxiety rather than authority. It is meant to transfer permanently and completely the locus of creative power from the external world, the circumstances, the economy, the luck, the other people, to the internal instrument of your own voice. Your circumstances are not happening to you. They are being decreed by you, moment by moment, word by word. This is not a judgment, it is a liberation, because if you are doing it, you can change it. The pen that wrote the old sentence can write the new one. The gavel that sealed the old verdict can seal the new one. The verdict is always in revision. The court is always in session. You hold the gavel. Read that sentence again, and this time, do not read it as encouragement or as metaphor. Read it as the precise, literal, legally binding statement of your position in the architecture of reality. You hold the gavel, not the economy, not your past, not the family you were born into, the education you did or did not receive, the partner who left, the job that was taken, the opportunity that was missed. Those are the effects of previous sentences. They are the executed verdicts of earlier judicial proceedings in your own courtroom, most of which took place without your conscious awareness or consent. But from this moment, from the point at which you understand the law, you have no grounds for unconscious proceedings. The court is no longer operating without your knowledge, you know. And knowing changes everything about the nature of your responsibility and your power. The courtroom of the universe is not a passive forum waiting for you to eventually find your voice. It is an active, perpetually operating system of causal law that has been producing your circumstances with perfect fidelity to every decree you have issued, conscious or unconscious, since the first day you began to speak. It has not been neglecting you. It has not been ignoring you. It has not been treating you less favorably than others. It has been executing your verdicts with the impartiality and the precision of a system that has no ego, no preference, and no opinion about what you decree. It simply receives the decree and executes the sentence. You have been the most prolific, the most influential, and the most powerful figure in your own life all along. The only variable that has changed today is that you now know this, and the knowledge cannot be returned. You cannot unknow the law of the wand. You cannot ununderstand the rudder principle. You are now, irrevocably, a conscious participant in the legal proceedings that determine the shape of your life. This is the empowerment that Florence Scovel Shinn spent her life attempting to transmit to every person who came to her, desperate and convinced that their problems were external, that their salvation required someone or something outside themselves to change, to yield, to arrive. She met them in that belief, listened to their cases with compassion and precision, and then directed their attention to the single instrument they had been ignoring throughout every season of their difficulty: their own voice. Not their effort, not their strategy, not their connections or their credentials, their voice. The instrument that was always in their possession, always available, always active, always producing the exact circumstances they were experiencing. She gave them the protocol, the formulas, the discipline, and the understanding. And the results, documented across decades of individual cases, letters, testimonials, and the enduring power of her still-read books, constitute a body of evidence that the law is real, that it responds to the spoken word of a conscious being with mathematical certainty, and that the transformation of circumstances through the disciplined application of this law is not rare or miraculous. It is the predictable, reproducible outcome of a cause and effect relationship that operates with the same reliability as every other law in the universe. The question that the teaching of Florence Scovel Shinn ultimately places before you is not whether the law exists. The law exists. The question is not whether it is working. It is working, and it has been working all along. The question is whether you're going to continue issuing your verdicts by accident, blindly, habitually, reflexively, one casual negative decree at a time, or whether you are going to take your seat on the bench with full awareness of the power you hold and begin issuing your verdicts with the deliberateness, the authority, and the absolute expectation of execution that the role of the supreme judge of your own life demands. The courtroom of the universe is waiting for your ruling. The bailiff stands ready. The law stands ready. The only variable is you, and more precisely, the next words that come out of your mouth. Speak with intention, not occasionally, not in your morning practice, not when you remember, and when it's convenient. Every word, every sentence, every decree, the intention must be woven into the fabric of your daily speech with the same thoroughness that the old habit of unconscious complaint was woven into it. Because the old habit had no off switch either. It ran continuously. It ran in the background of every conversation, in the margins of every interaction, in the automatic commentary that narrated your day back to yourself. The new practice must replace it at that same level of thoroughness and continuity, not because the law requires your exhausting effort, but because the law requires your consistent command, and the command must be issued from a being who has understood, finally and completely, that they are the judge, that the universe is the court, and that the gavel has always been in their hand. Speak with authority. The authority is not something you must earn or develop through years of spiritual practice before you are allowed to use it. The authority is already yours. It is the inherent authority of a conscious being who is the first cause in the specific domain of their own life, the origin point of the decrees that govern their individual portion of the universal substance. You have always had this authority. You have been exercising it continuously, whether or not you acknowledged it or used it deliberately. The practice does not grant you authority you did not previously possess. It directs your awareness to the authority you have always held and trains you to exercise it consciously rather than recklessly. When you speak a righteous decree, you are not hoping the universe will agree. You are issuing an order to a system that is structurally obligated to comply. Speak from that knowing, speak from the bench. The world is listening, not metaphorically, not poetically, literally, in the precise sense of a responsive field that receives every frequency you emit and rearranges itself accordingly. The world has always been listening. It listened when you joked about being broke. It listened when you complained about your health. It listened when you gossiped and commiserated and rehearsed your limitations for the entertainment of your social circle, and it executed every sentence faithfully. It will listen now with the same fidelity and the same speed when you speak of abundance, of health, of connection, of opportunity, of exactly the life you have chosen. The world does not decide whether to listen. It is constitutionally incapable of not listening. The only question is what you will say. Here is the challenge that will determine whether this video remains an interesting hour of content or becomes the turning point in the architecture of your life. For 24 consecutive hours, beginning the moment this video ends, you will undertake what the vocal discipline protocol designates as the silence or blessing challenge. The operating rule is absolute. and admits no exception. For the full duration of this 24-hour period, every word that exits your mouth will be one of three things: a word of victory, a word of praise, or a word of abundance. A statement that advances the heading you have chosen. A decree that presses the mold of the life you are building into the universal substance. If the words forming in your mouth do not meet this criterion, if they are the language of complaint, fear, self-deprecation, gossip, or limitation, then they will not be spoken. You will hold silence completely on that subject for that moment, for as long as the conversation runs in that direction. Silence is the default. The decree is the goal. What this challenge will reveal in ways that no amount of conceptual explanation can substitute for is the full scale of the verbal discipline that this teaching requires and the full scale of the transformation it makes possible. Within the first hour, most people discover that the proportion of their ordinary speech that would fail the test is staggering. The casual complaints are constant. The self-deprecating remarks are automatic. The commentary on others' failures is habitual. The reflexive narration of everything that is going wrong runs like a background program, filling every silence that arises, lubricating every social interaction, serving as the default content of most conversations. To withdraw from all of this simultaneously, to impose the silence or blessing standard on your full daily speech, is to discover with the visceral clarity of direct experience how profoundly and pervasively the language of lack has been operating as the foundational signal of your life. This discovery is not comfortable. It is, however, essential. You cannot change a pattern you cannot see, and the challenge makes the pattern visible in the most immediate and undeniable way possible. The second thing the challenge reveals is the positive dimension, the extraordinary power that your speech begins to accumulate as it becomes concentrated into the channel of conscious, authoritative decree. When you are not diffusing your vocal creative energy across the vast surface area of complaint, gossip, and idle chatter, that energy concentrates. The decrees you do issue carry more weight, more clarity, more penetrating force. This is the acoustic principle of coherence applied to human speech. A laser produces its cutting, cauterizing, structurally transforming power not by generating more light than a lamp, but by generating light of a single frequency, moving in a single direction without diffusion. The challenge, by forcing you to choose between silence and blessing, transforms your speech from a lamp into a laser. The creative power was always there. What changes is its coherence, its direction, and therefore its effect. The social dimension of the challenge is where its deepest lessons are learned and where the full weight of what Shinn was teaching becomes personally concrete. You will be in conversations with your partner, your colleagues, your friends, where the social current is running powerfully in the direction of complaint or gossip, where your silence will be noticed and possibly challenged. Why aren't you saying anything? Don't you agree that this situation is terrible? These moments are not obstacles to the challenge. They are the curriculum, because the answer to these moments determines whether the vocal discipline protocol remains a private practice you perform in the morning or becomes the actual governing principle of your real daily life. The challenge forces the practice out of the protected space of private ritual and into the messy, pressured, socially complex environment where it has to either hold or collapse. And where it holds, where you maintain the silence or offer the blessing, and let the social discomfort be present without capitulating to it, you will feel something shift in your relationship to your own authority that no amount of conceptual understanding could have produced. The final instruction of this video is this: when you complete the 24 hours, not perfectly because you will slip and the erasure command exists precisely for those moments, when you reach the end of the challenge with an honest assessment of what you have spoken and what you have held in silence, you will have data. Real, specific, personal data about the state of your verbal creative field. You will know in a way that is no longer theoretical the proportion of your ordinary speech that was serving the life you want and the proportion that was working against it. That data is not a judgment. It is a map. And a map, no matter how unflattering the territory it depicts, is always more useful than the comfortable fiction that no map is needed. You have the map now. You have the law. You have the protocol. You have the understanding. All that remains is the decree. Subscribe to Sacred Logic, not for the content, for the continued mastery of the language of the gods, the precise, law-governed, architecturally rigorous understanding of how reality is built, word by word, decree by decree, verdict by verdict, by the one being in the universe who holds the gavel over your life. That being is you. It has always been you. The bench has been empty only because you did not know to take your seat. Now you know. Take it.